Welcome to Off the Cuff. This is a podcast dedicated to all things music. I'm one of your hosts, Patrick Thames.
And I'm the other host, Rojay Moore.
And we're so glad that you come and listen to us talk about all things music. You know, today we have a topic that we're going to focus on. But before we talk about that topic, we need to kind of introduce who we are to you. And so I'm going to let my co-host, Mr. Rojay Moore, I want him to go ahead and introduce himself to us.
Yeah, so this is Rojay Moore. I am a music instructor, band director here at one of the local high schools in the Little Rock area, Little Rock, Arkansas. I'm a graduate of North Little Rock High School, and I attended college where I majored in jazz studies, jazz performance at the University of New Orleans, where at the time Ellis Marsalis was the Coca-Cola Endowed Chair of Jazz. And I eventually started taking private trombone lessons for applied brass from jazz trombonist extraordinaire Delfeo Marsalis, who's one of the younger brothers of Wynton Marsalis.
Hold up, you took lessons with Delfeo?
Yep, Delfeo Marsalis.
Am I saying his name correctly?
Delfeo, correct.
Okay.
Yep. So he was my trombone instructor for a couple of years while there doing my undergrad work at the University of New Orleans. I then graduated December 2004 with a jazz studies, jazz performance degree. Started teaching in January 2005 and hadn't looked back since. So it's 16 years later. I've been teaching instrumental music for the North Little Rock and Little Rock school districts, and also had a 2-year stint in Jacksonville, Arkansas. I also founded a nonprofit organization called Rocktown Community Performing Arts, where Patrick Thames also was one of the music instructors there, and that has been up since the fall of 2015. It's been going strong since the fall of 2015. So that's basically a community performing arts of musicians from the middle school and the high school level. And now we have students who are in the collegiate level who are coming back and doing instruction. And also we have an alumni band coming up. So I'll be getting in touch with you about that coming up here this summer. So that's a little quick rundown of who I am and what I've done.
Wow. I mean, it's been awesome seeing these students develop over the years, and we'll talk more information, give you more information about those students. It's just been fantastic and amazing. I have been a part of Rocktown. It's been a fantastic experience for me. Also, I was like his assistant band director at one of the high schools that he was the band director at, and it was a fulfilling experience for me because I learned a lot. So he's a great mentor for me. I'm Patrick Thames, and I am an elementary music educator. I tend to leave the cookies down at the bottom shelf. What I mean by that is I like to make it simple for beginners and so that they can be successful to play. I've taught in a wide variety of settings. I taught at the private arena. That's where I spent most of my time working at the parochial schools. And I taught music, but then I also taught chemistry. I also taught Algebra 1, Algebra 2, geometry. And that was just for fun that I started teaching those courses. And I eventually made my way back to music in 2005. And I was hired as an elementary music teacher for the North Little Rock School District. So that's how we got connected. And if you follow me on my YouTube channel, I'm a jazz musician. I consider myself a doubler. I play clarinet, saxophone, flute, bass guitar, little piano, trombone, baritone, and dabble on the trumpet. I'm not as good as I want to. I wouldn't ever try to record or I have recorded on the trumpet, but I don't tell people that's me. But anyway, so that tells you a little bit about me. I'm excited about starting this new podcast, and we hope that you will be excited too. We eventually want to have some special guests. Rojay has got some very good connections in the jazz world, and we want to introduce some of those connections to you. I have connections in the jazz world, and some heavy hitters that I'm sure that they would
Yeah.
want to come and talk to you, and they'll have something to say to our off the cuff topics.
Mm-hmm.
And we won't tell them what we're going to talk about.
Right. It's off the cuff.
It'll be off the cuff.
Right. That's it.
Only thing we know about is the title.
Right.
You know, I tell you what, we can also ask you, the listener, to send us titles that you think something we could talk about. Now, if you get downright messed up with your language, we probably won't talk about that.
Right.
Because we try to have a Christian witness out there.
There
Can I get a witness?
There you go. Amen to that now. But, you know, just thinking about off the cuff, there's times just in conversation, like earlier today, where we're just driving down the street and we're having a conversation about music, and there are certain topics that come up in our conversation that we feel like would be a good podcast episode. And so that's where we get the off the cuff. It's like, it's not something that's premeditated, like these are the next 12 lessons or 12 episodes that we're going to do. It's just whatever is the talk of the conversation at that time that would be a good conversation to bring to the public. And if you want to put comments, add things to the podcast, that'll be great. If you want to email us and you have additional comments that you want to share, maybe we'll be able to read feedback. Or if you have questions as it relates to the particular topic that we have that you would like us to answer on a subsequent podcast, that's also, I can give you my email, and you can send those questions or comments in.
Yeah, so we'll provide a place with both our emails, and you can get in contact with us. No hate mail, please.
Right.
No hate mail. just listen, and if you don't like what we say,
hate mail won't be acknowledged. It'll go in the delete.
Oh man. Well, we have a topic that we want to talk about today, and this is a topic that is near and dear to both our hearts because of the style of music we enjoy playing. Now, I'm very familiar with classical music. I'm a classical euphonium player trained in my undergraduate degree. I studied with Andy Anders. Mm-hmm. Mr. Anders, if you're listening, I love you, man. Yeah. Great teacher. And I studied classical, but I came over into jazz when I was in grad school. I did study some jazz techniques in my undergrad, but this is near and dear to my heart, the jazz education. Here's the title. Here it is. State of Jazz Education Today. State of Jazz Education Today. Now, I know there's many facets of jazz education. There are those who are planning on going to university. There are those who graduate high school and go immediately move to New York and start gigging. There are those, who are just going to play in the jazz band or just play in their elementary or middle school jazz band, and that's going to be it. But we're just kind of encompassing all of it, from the elementary level all the way up to the professional level, and all the dealings with jazz education. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Well, just from coming from my perspective as it relates to high school, there are some things that I require as part of the coursework for jazz education. Whether the kid wanted to be in the jazz band class and I selected them because of their skill level and their interest, or if it's just someone I recruited to put in the jazz class, because you want to have a jazz program, you got to have bodies in it. So it's just some of the required coursework. You got to learn jazz standards. That's a must. Jazz transcriptions is a must, and these are things that I actively have a part of our jazz program. Jazz theory is also a part, and jazz history, and this is all in the actual ensemble class. These are not separate classes that they're taking, because you are dealing with high school where they have to have so many classes in their core curriculum to graduate and so on and so forth. So all of these things are built into the actual jazz instrumental class. Mm-hmm. Just to kind of real quick to talk about each one of those. Jazz standards are a must. You have to learn the culture of jazz. And by learning jazz standards, you are basically being in touch with those who pioneered the jazz culture. And so you just have to learn jazz standards. If you go into a gig and you're going to play jazz and you're not an established musician, you need to play something that the audience recognizes. That way, you kind of win the audience over, because they're like, okay, well, they're playing standards, not just coming in and playing something that's just that they're oblivious to, that they don't know. So you have to learn jazz standards, because if you're going on a jam session, The other guys know a plethora of jazz standards.
Yeah.
And if you get up there and you don't know any jazz standards, then you're kind of, lost. You're stuck like Chuck.
All the list that you put there, do you think that your average band director, now we are located here in Central Arkansas, so it may be different where you're located at, but what we know from what we've seen, maybe Essential Ellington. Do you feel like these band directors are doing some of the things that you're saying?
I think some are doing a little bit of these things that's on this list, but I think just as a holistic, just looking at it from the jazz education standpoint at the high school level, I think a lot of these things are neglected, not because they don't care about it or because they don't feel that it's important. A lot of them just don't know.
They don't know
themselves.
See, what is a problem is when they think they know.
Yeah, and they don't.
And see, you studied in jazz studies at University of New Orleans.
Right. And so seeing jazz programs, I had a student. He wasn't a student of mine. He was actually a church member of mine, but he was a younger student. I was in high school. He was in middle school, but he aspired to be a jazz musician like me. He knew of me from the church, played trombone. He was a saxophone player. Then I was in college and he was in the high school that I attended. And his viewpoint on the jazz music that they played at that time was that it was cartoon jazz. In other words, it was imitation jazz. It wasn't the real deal. It was just jazz. It was music that sounded jazzy, but it wasn't the real deal. It wasn't authentic jazz. And so that's why number one on my list is jazz standards. You have to know. And then you can get into the details in terms of the different eras and the different those who pioneered like in the bebop era or the swing era. You can get all into that later, but the basis is they need to be learning jazz standards. They need to know and have something to work from. So I think even with the jazz transcriptions, I think I may be one of few high school jazz band directors that are requiring their students to transcribe. It's important that you learn the language of jazz, and what better way to learn the language of jazz than learning from those who were the pioneers, the forefathers of this art.
Oh, that's cool, man. I guess I'm thinking about your elementary band director, elementary music teacher. And when I teach elementary school music, it's my job to introduce jazz to them. It's all about introduction. Now, we're on many different facets because I'm on the elementary side. So I'm introducing the students to the art form. And, when I teach, especially the elementary students, we focus on learning what a jazz swing feel is. We focus in on learning how to snap or clap on 2 and 4. We focus in on scat singing. Things that doesn't take a lot of instrumental technique like you'll be at the high school level, high school jazz band. So we focusing in on them internalizing the swing feel and internalizing how it feels to sing in a jazz manner. We did a concert one time where I taught the xylophone players a song. It was an original composition by Arthur Lipner. It was called Slick. And I had it's on YouTube, by the way, and I had my students to learn the xylophone part, and then I also had Rojay's group be the accompaniment for them, and they also accompanied the students. So that's how I approach it, at the elementary level, because I see that what I do, I'm the first line of defense, so to speak. In other words, they have a basis. So by the time they get to you, if we all work together, they should all be learning. It should be, what's the word? One thing after, like a domino effect. Everybody's working together. So by the time they get to a high school, they shouldn't be hearing that you should clap on 2 and 4.
Right.
They shouldn't be hearing what is the swing feel. Ding, 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 ding. My kids know that.
Right.
That's because I taught them. So I think that's important. I teach kindergartners that. I teach first grade that. I teach second grade that. And we do a little interesting rhythm. We do like gum, bubble gum, bubble gum, bubble gum, bubble gum, and I had them do that, and they sing with the jazz play along record, or they sing, with another jazz record, and they just learn to have fun with it, and they learn to communicate and get to see how it feels. Mm-hmm. So, the state of jazz education. How do you feel is at the middle school level? Let's talk about that. Middle school.
It's pretty much almost non-existent,
Yeah.
At least in the area in which we are in. I think what you're doing at the grassroots level with the elementary is very, very important, because now they're able to identify with the sounds of jazz, like you said, with the ding, ding, a ding, ding, a ding, or a gum.
Also, we talk about the artists.
Artists and everything.
We talk about Duke Ellington. We talk about John Coltrane. We talk about Charlie Parker. Mm-hmm. The difficulty with talking about those people is sometimes it is their lifestyles.
Right.
We don't get into those lifestyles with the first grader, second grader. You just can't talk about John Coltrane's drug habit, later on in life. You can't talk about Charlie Parker's addiction to drugs, whatnot. Maybe at a lower level in fifth grade, but you have to be very careful what you tell them, and not focusing in on the music only.
Well, it's interesting that you brought up jazz composers and artists, because they should know who Louis, Satchmo, Armstrong, Duke Ellington,
we
Count
spent
Basie,
a long time.
all of those guys, by the time they get to middle school and high school, because now I'm a person that loves the music of Duke Ellington, but with way I love the music of Duke Ellington, you would have thought I learned about Duke Ellington when I was 5 or 6 years old. Mm-hmm. I didn't know who Duke Ellington was until one day in 9th grade, high school, my older brother introduced me to jazz cassette. Well, he gave me a jazz cassette tape on it, and it had Duke Ellington. It was a 2-sided tape. I listened to it, and when I got the cassette tape, the first thing that I heard was Things Ain't What They Used to Be. It was called Things Ain't What They Used to Be. And I had no idea who Duke Ellington was. I thought Duke Ellington was a Caucasian jazz musician, or just a Caucasian musician. I had no idea that Duke Ellington composed over 2,000 pieces of original music, and his band was together for 50 years, 40 plus years. I knew nothing. And that was 9th grade. So I got a late start of introduction, not because of my brother's fault, but because of the music system that we grew up in. It wasn't just made known to us. So I didn't learn about Duke Ellington until 9th grade, but now by you being at the grassroots and these kids being introduced to the jazz artists, not just identifying the sounds, that's very, very key. That's very, very important. Very, very important.
I mean, my students struggle with, is this relevant? Mm-hmm. And this is the question. I don't know if you get this question, but at the elementary level, I get this question a lot. Mm-hmm. Are they still alive?
Right.
In other words, is music still going on? Okay, you playing something that's great. You telling me this is great, but you're always playing dead people music to me. So that's why I play Jacob Collier. Mm-hmm. That's why I play Roy Hargrove. Yeah. And I let them see them. That's why I play, what's the trumpet player? Christian Scott. I play him with Elena Pender Hughes, and I let them see it. It was so funny, man. It was hilarious, man. One of the kids was acting up. They were just not feeling. I think it was Duke Ellington. They were not trying to hear that. Right. I said, so you think that jazz is boring? One of the big boys, 5th grade, said, yeah, it's boring. We won't listen to this. Yeah. I said, okay. And I put in Christian Scott, Tiny Desk Concert. Listeners, if you hadn't listened to it, it's awesome. It's a concert. It's got Christian Scott and his group, and the flautist, Elena Pender Hughes. Okay. And she's a beautiful young lady. Them boys sat down.
Got that attention.
them boys sat down, and Christian Scott, he just has cool just coming all off him, kind of like Roy Hargrove. Yeah. When I was coming up watching him, he just had a persona and making jazz cool again and make it like real. Right. Now when I went to Duke Ellington, they could listen. I think you got to grab their attention like that. Right. That's but see, Christian Scott could also play some Duke Ellington, and he hip to Duke Ellington. Oh, yeah. And same with Roy Hargrove. Right. So we as educators are missing showing that too. I showed that to them. We spent like 10, 12 minutes watching whole. I stopped my lesson plan. I said, you're going to watch this. Since jazz is not hip. And they were doing extensive 10 chord solos.
Mm-hmm.
And when they went off, they said, "Can I see it again? Mm-hmm. Can I see it again? What's that? Let me write that down. Mr. Thames, can I get a sheet of paper, write that down?"
See, I think band directors have to be very flexible with the way they teach, because sometimes we get so caught up in our standards and assessment and the different things that we have to do, we miss the creative process that goes into the art of teaching, because teaching is an art. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not just a science, it's an art. You have to be very, very creative how you do it. So with me, even with high school level students, you know, they've grown up in they're growing up in the 2000 era. So right, they grew up in what we call the hip hop age, the hip hop generation, and so they're not hip to much that's pre 2000, other than maybe Tupac and some other rap artists that was really, you know, significant in the 90s. However, music of the 30s and the 40s and the big band era, swing era, they're just not hip to that. So what I do is, when they say, because I taught at the middle school level, music appreciation. Mm-hmm. When they think they don't like jazz, when they think they don't like blues, I start right where they're at, right from which they listen to, the music that they listen to. And I show them how to identify the blues and jazz in everything that they're listening to. Mm-hmm. And so once I was able to do that, then I just go back 30, 40, 50 years. And I just continue to go back, and I trace it all the way back to slave chants and work songs and field hollers and the blues and you know, rhythm and blues and the rock and funk and all those different eras that they really don't know set up what they're listening to now. There's one particular artist named Kodak Black, who's a rap artist here in the 2000s, very popular and well known amongst the young generation. And he has a tune called Gospel. And when you hear the song first come on, it sounds strictly like old school traditional gospel that you would hear in a Baptist church. And then before you know it, that the sound of the music transition into more of an R&B feel. And then a couple bars later, it turns into the beat drops, right? The beat drops, and all of a sudden you have this hip hop beat. He's rapping, but they're singing in the background. Well, a lot of times these rap artists, they're kind of rapping and singing at the same time. A lot of the rap artists do that now. Drake, a lot of these artists, J. Cole, they rap, but they also sing. Chris Brown. But then you listen to it and it sounds like hip hop, but it still got that gospel background feel to it. And I just showed them how all the different styles just morphed into one, what they're used to now. I'm like, see, look, there's blues in that, there's gospel in there, there's R&B, there's funk, there's all of that in there. Then they start getting an appreciation for the art itself, jazz or blues. Because a lot of times they say blues and jazz is old folks' music. They just haven't been taught. They just haven't been exposed to it. So I think that's why what you're doing is very, very key. And like you talked about, that whole curriculum alignment, being able to align what you do at the elementary level with what the middle school band directors need for their kids to know coming into 6th, 7th, 8th grade. What do I need for a kid to know coming into the 9th grade? They shouldn't have to hear about me talking to them about clapping on the 2 and 4 at that level. They should know that. Don't clap on the 1 and 3.
Yeah,
like,
jazz music.
Yeah. It's like, you should know that. And so I think you bring out a great point. I think you bring out a great point in that.
You know, it sounds like, well, I know he works in an urban setting, within an urban community, and I do.
Right.
And so since we work, you know, in an urban community, we tend to deal with more minorities.
Right.
So the kind of things that we're talking about, are they an indicator of our communities? Do you think more suburban environment have to deal with this? Or are they totally ignoring? They're not even dealing with any of that. Is it, you know, okay, I'm going to tell you where I'm trying to go with this. It seemed to me when I see some of these less urban environments, their technique is out of this world. They can play them horns.
Right.
You know, if I go down the roadway, I don't want to mention the school, but if I go down the roadway or 30 minutes from where I'm at right now, I mean, those kids can play, but they don't understand style. They don't understand technique, and you know, they're getting the top chairs in all region and all state. You know, we were just looking at this college ensemble, and probably both of those players were top players.
Right.
So where's the disconnect in that environment with these middle school to high school students going into college, not understanding the jazz art form in the language, the art form? What's going on there? You know,
well, I think a lot of times it's for instance,
You talk
their
about them
focus-
not knowing,
Right.
too. The band directors not knowing,
Right.
not the kids.
Right, not the kids. Right. The focus is different. We can even. I'm a take a detour to cover your point. Okay, so for instance, the band in which I lead for marching, we're a show style band.
That's
We're a
right.
show style marching band. Now, show style can be either predominantly white bands, and it can also be black college bands. Ohio State, Michigan, those are show style bands. But the music that they play is different. When you deal with the stand tunes and the tunes that we do on the field, those tunes are different. They're going to cater more to our demographic, our audience, right? And so
The
when
urban setting.
yeah, exactly, in which we
Primarily
reside and teach.
minorities, black, white, Hispanic, or black and Hispanic.
Black, right? Yeah, black and Hispanic, correct. And so when you look at those marching band programs, show style, they're not focused as much on the marching assessment aspect as our counterparts are. Whereas we're focusing more on the showmanship. We're still dealing with musicianship, but we're dealing more with showmanship because at halftime, we don't want the fans going to the concessions getting popcorn. We want them watching us. We want them locked in on us. What they gonna do this week, man? Like, we want to generate not just revenue for we want to generate revenue, but we also want to generate the interest level for the audience to come because of what's happening aesthetic wise on the field. The choreographic movements, the dancing, the music that they relate to. We want to keep our student body in their seats at halftime, right? So that's our focus. And so when we go back to what you were talking about in terms of the focus of those band directors in those band programs, yes, technique, technical facility, and all of those things are so important. But I think some band directors focus so much on that, they box out the creativity aspect and the musicianship aspect. And so when you deal with us, talking about the urban community, a lot of our students grew up in the church. A lot of our musicians, our percussionists, they're playing drums, they're playing piano because a lot of our parents started churches, and so they need a piano player and a drummer, and it's their kid, right? And so they're getting that exposure to that music where they're dealing with the style and the feel of that music. And so I think it's just a disconnect. It's a cultural thing, but it's almost like at the show style schools, they expect us to be just as involved with the assessment aspect of concert band and marching. And I think you should give the kids the best of both worlds. I'm the type of person I want to be able to expose my kids to the core style as well as the show style. So put a blend. And I think band directors have to be flexible. That goes back to what I said earlier. They have to be flexible. So while we do focus on technical facility and all those things, if you lack style, you really hadn't really grabbed anybody's attention. The audience is really not feeling what you're playing. It's like I always tell kids when they're not playing with feeling, I say, do you have a soul? Or is there anything that you can feel? Because right now you're playing very dry and it's very bland. You sound good, you're producing good tone and technique, but now we need style. And that's why I think going back to the jazz coursework, we need transcriptions.
We need you mean like
we need to have students transcribing to understand the language of jazz.
Oh, I understand.
They need to be transcribing jazz solos, even if they're not wanting to go to college to major in jazz studies or be a professional jazz musician. If they're in a jazz band, how do you play that language? How do you play that style? You have to learn the language of the jazz, and that's how you do it by jazz transcriptions.
When you were you have a more of an advantage than I did because I went purely classical, and I did take some theoretical jazz courses, but most of my professors were all classical oriented. And of course, I went ahead and got my master's in jazz studies, but you have a little bit of advantage because you went to undergrad specifically for jazz studies. But I'm here to tell you, those who go and do a music education degree, a 4-year music education degree, most of the time it's focusing on band, orchestra, or choir. And maybe there's some teaching, a little bit of teaching in the jazz education arena, but pretty much it's virtually ignored. You have to be a self-starter. I never forget I did my music history paper on Miles Davis, Kinda Blue,
Right.
and his solo development on it. And I started with the so what chorus, dun dun do 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 dun dun. So I had all of those chords lined out, and I analyzed it from Wynton Kelly's piano intro, and the drums and Paul Chambers bass, and I analyzed the whole thing, and led up to Miles Davis solo, and I was talking about how it all lined out.
Right.
And it just so happened the lady that I took for music history, she's a classical flute player and great music history teacher. She wasn't going to accept that paper. Basically, I had to go up to her husband and ask him to talk to her and see if she could receive the paper.